Chapter 5. Harry got off the Hogwarts Express and looked around until his eyes fell on Sirius, who was waiting for him. The sight made his heart beat faster. His godfather was a physical reminder that he would never have to go back to the Dursleys. He actually had a home where he was wanted now, and people who cared about him. There was no more reason for him to dread the holidays, even if he would be spending the whole summer at Grimmauld Place. And Sirius had assured him that the house looked much better now. Ignoring Ron and Hermione, who were right behind him, he all but ran to his godfather and threw his arms around him. The vision Voldemort had sent him during his History of Magic OWL still haunted his dreams. Luckily, the Dark Lord knew nothing of the mirror Sirius had given him, so instead of rushing to the Ministry of Magic, as Voldemort had obviously planned, Harry had run to his room, pulled out the mirror, and contacted his godfather. Despite the fact that he knew that Sirius was okay, that he hadn't been anywhere near the Ministry, Harry still couldn't get rid of those horrible images. Sirius seemed to understand this, because he wrapped his arms around his godson and hugged him tight, only letting go when Ron and Hermione joined them with the luggage.
"I'll be taking you by sidelong apparition, to be on the safe side. Moony and Diggle are taking care of Hedwig and your trunk,"
Sirius let him know, indicating the two men standing behind himself. Harry greeted his former professor with a hug and shook hands with Daedalus Diggle, whom he'd only met briefly before. Then he said goodbye to his friends, knowing he'd see them in a couple of weeks when they would be joining him at headquarters. He waved to Mrs. Weasley before finally grabbing Sirius's arm. Seconds later, they were standing in the kitchen at Grimmauld Place.
"Home, sweet home," Sirius drawled sarcastically.
Harry grinned at him. True, the house didn't feel like a home and most likely never would, but as long as he was with his godfather and Remus, he was fine.
"You'll be staying in the same room as last time. I think it looks quite a bit nicer now, and I took the portrait out, so Phineas can't bother you again. I left the second bed, however, for when Ron comes to stay. That okay?"
The animagus checked.
"Yeah, of course,"
Harry assured him.
"Okay, why don't you go and freshen up? I bought you some clothes, so you don't need to wait for your trunk to arrive."
The dark-haired boy smiled again, remembering his last shopping trip with his godfather. Once Sirius had realized that all the clothes Harry owned were secondhand from his cousin, he had insisted on buying a whole new wardrobe. Harry still felt a little overwhelmed, never having been spoiled like this before, but it was nice to finally have clothes that actually fit. He thanked his godfather again and made his way upstairs, noting that Mrs. Black's portrait was still there, even if the others weren't. He was starting to doubt that they would ever get her down. Tiptoeing past the portrait, which was thankfully silent behind the curtain, he went into his room to freshen up and get changed. It really looked a lot nicer now. It was clean, the walls had been freshly painted, and there were new rugs on the floor. A large Gryffindor banner now took up the space where the portrait of Phineas Nigellus had been. When he made his way back, he noticed that the door to the room 2 doors down from his stood ajar. Glancing inside, he stopped dead in his tracks upon spying an all-too-familiar blonde head. It couldn't be.
"Malfoy?"
The blonde looked up from his book in surprise. "Potter." For a moment, they just stared at each other.
"What are you doing here?"
Harry finally demanded. "Reading?" Draco deadpanned.
"Funny, Malfoy. I meant..."
The dark-haired boy tried to clarify, only to be interrupted by a voice behind himself, which made both of them jump.
"Draco will be staying here for the summer. He's on our side now, Harry,"
Remus Lupin explained. Harry gave him a doubtful look, but the werewolf chose to ignore it.
"I brought your trunk. Come on, help me carry it into your room."
Knowing full well that Remus could just as well float the trunk into his room, Harry still obeyed.
"You don't actually believe that he switched sides?"
he asked his former professor, once the door had closed behind them, noting that Hedwig was already perched on top of the wardrobe.
"In fact, I do, Harry. I know that you and Draco don't get along, but he really is on our side. He broke with his father to escape Voldemort's service. That's the reason he's here. He's not safe anymore,"
Remus let him know. Harry still looked disbelieving.
"His father was going to force him to become a Death Eater, Harry. Draco told Andromeda and asked for help. I think a lot of his actions in the past were really just him trying to please his father. But Lucius finally went too far."
"So I have to spend my summer trapped in a house with Malfoy?"
The dark-haired boy realized glumly, scowling at the werewolf, who had the audacity to chuckle.
"Maybe it won't be so bad. Draco's been warned to behave, and he's been surprisingly polite so far. I think that you should try to bury the hatchet and start over. Who knows? Maybe you'll even become friends now that you're on the same side."
The suggestion of Malfoy and him becoming friends made Harry snort.
"Yeah, when hell freezes over,"
he replied, ignoring Remus's grin. After a long talk with Sirius, Harry decided that simply ignoring Malfoy would be the best course of action. It worked well enough during dinner, but when the dark-haired boy went to his room to unpack later, Malfoy actually followed him.
"What do you want?"
Harry snapped when the blonde appeared in his doorway. Draco hesitated before entering uninvited. He stopped in the middle of the room, staring at Harry, obviously trying to find the right words. It was weird to see him fidgeting. Normally he appeared so sure of himself. "I was told to make peace with you," was what he finally settled on. Harry looked at him like he'd lost his mind.
"Who told you that, Remus?"
he guessed. "Andromeda, actually," the blonde muttered. "But that's beside the point. Can't we just, end this feud? Be civil to each other?" Harry snorted. What a ridiculous idea.
"I don't like you, Malfoy. You're an evil git, and I don't believe you really changed all of a sudden. And you don't like me either, so why the sudden interest in playing nice?" he wanted to know.
It really was very suspicious. He wasn't surprised to see the familiar sneer on Draco's face. "You don't know anything about me, Potter. Nothing at all," he claimed, stalking closer. "You really think this is how I pictured spending my summer? Locked up in this hellhole with you in black? But I have no choice here, and as much as I hate it, my life is in your fucking hands now," he spat.
"What the hell is that supposed to mean?" Harry shouted back.
"You don't get it, do you? I have nowhere else to go. If my father catches me, or any one of his Death Eater friends, I'm as good as dead. Your godfather made it pretty clear that it'll only take one word from you, and he'll throw me out. So if you really hate me so much, go ahead. Tell him to get rid of me, and you'll be rid of me for good." Harry stared at him agape, slowly realizing that he meant it. He really had nowhere else to go. He'd never seen Malfoy this emotional before. Sure, the blonde had gotten angry at him before, and back in their first year, during the horrible excursion in the Dark Forest, he'd been scared. But still, there'd always been the cold and calm mask he seemed to wear. Now that mask was gone, and Harry realized with a start that while he tried to act brave, he was actually terrified. Raking a hand through his hair, messing it up even more in the process, Harry stared at the other boy with mixed emotions. They had been rivals since day one, and he really hated Malfoy. Not surprising considering all his evil tricks. But he also felt strangely sympathetic.
"All right, let's make peace, be civil or whatever, and I won't ask Sirius to kick you out, don't worry," he finally decided.
"Always the noble Gryffindor," Draco sneered, but it looked forced, and he couldn't hide how glad he felt.
"Yeah, lucky for you," Harry shot back.
The blonde left soon after, and over the next few days, Harry mostly succeeded in avoiding him. Really, it wasn't all that hard. Draco seemed to spend most of his time in his room, only leaving it for meals and to use the bathroom. They did their best to be polite to each other whenever they met, which seemed to amuse Sirius to no end for some reason. Remus, however, felt the need for another pep talk and cornered Harry in his room, asking him to give Draco a chance.
"I don't understand why you care so much. Malfoy's a brat. He hates werewolves and probably considers us all below him," Harry insisted.
"Do you really believe that?" the werewolf asked. "He's been very polite to me since his arrival. To all of us, actually. I think being away from Lucius's influence is good for him. He's finally starting to think for himself. Who knows? Maybe we'll get to know the real Draco now. Not the boy his father expected him to be."